Good morning. I got choked up just as we got going there. Forgive me. Good morning and welcome to our study in the book of Genesis. Really excited about having you with me this morning. Beautiful day here in Northeast Arkansas, but blazing hot. Yeah, well, here we are at the end of July. What do you expect, Sonny Childs? But the chickens are cackling, so that means I'm getting some eggs, and I got air conditioner going on in here, and so I'm cool. It's all good. Genesis chapter 30. Really neat chapter. A little bit odd. Got a baby competition going on in chapter 30. So buckle up. Here we go. All right, there's your 10 questions. And so take a picture of that so you'll be ready as we rush through this chapter. And we are going to rush a lot of material. You got it? All right, here we go. By way of review, as we always do. Kind of rhymed, didn't it? Creation, chapter 1. Retelling of creation, chapter 2, emphasizing the coming of man and woman. Fall of man, chapter 3. Cain kills Abel in 4. Got the lineage from Adam, see the tree, all the way to the big boat, Noah. Then in chapter 6, Noah's actually going to get the instructions from God, time to build the big boat. I just was blessed to travel up there in North Kentucky and see the big replica of the ark. It's really, really impressive. The flood comes in chapter 7. In chapter 8, we've got the dove who's going to bring back the olive branch, and so we're allowed to get off the ark. Chapter 9, the covenant with Noah. 10, Noah's descendants are going to begin to disperse, but a bunch of them say, nah, I think we'll stick together, even though God says, I want you to disperse. They build the Tower of Babel. God comes down there and confuses their languages. Chapter 12, Abram, notice it's still Abram, is going to be called to Canaan, and so we're going to begin that journey with Abram at this point. Abram and Lot have to separate because they got too much stuff. 14, Abram rescues Lot and he meets Melchizedek. 15, God's going to promise the promised land to, what's the name? You're going to promise the promised land. Canaan is going to promise it to Abram. And we begin the covenant scenario, interlude, birth of Ishmael, covenant sealed with the operation of circumcision. Chapter 18, Abraham. Notice his name has changed. He welcomes those friends, the travelers who come in, one of which is the Lord, and they're coming to look in on Sodom to see if it's as bad as it is. It is, and Sodom is destroyed. Let's go back there. Sodom is destroyed. 20, Abraham tells that half-truth about his wife, calls her his sister. Birth of Isaac in 21. Abraham sacrifices Isaac, or at least he tries to, in 22. 23, Sarah is going to die. 24, see the 4's upside down. The wife we're going to get a wife for Isaac. Servant is going to be sent off to Uncle Laban's house, and we're going to get a wife for Isaac. Interestingly enough, Isaac is going to send his son to Uncle Laban's house to get it. So Uncle Laban provides a lot of wives. Okay, fifth out of it's 25. You see the 2's on the side. 25. Halfway through this marvelous book, Abraham is going to die. So he's kind of the midway marker. And as you can imagine, Abraham is a very, very big character in the timeline of humanity. 26, we've got the blessing of Isaac. 27, we're going to see that Jacob is going to trick Esau into giving up his blessing. That was wrong. Jacob tricks Isaac into giving up Esau's blessing. Remember, Jacob's already claimed the birthright earlier on with the giving of the stew and all that kind of stuff, and now it's going to be the blessing. All right, Jacob has to leave camp because his brother wants to kill him. Jacob has a stone for a pillow, and he sees the ladder going up into heaven, the Lord standing at the top, and the angels ascending and descending. Jacob marries in chapter 21, and you remember that was a rather interesting chapter. Got the 2 wives and all that. Laban evidently pretty good supplier of wives, but a very deceptive individual. What better place for Jacob to go to, because he's one of the great deceivers as well. And in chapter 30, you're going to see that we're going to get 11 of the 12 sons of Jacob are going to be born, including a daughter who's going to be born. So we've got 11 sons and 1 daughter. Dinah will be born as well in this particular chapter. And you see the 3, got 2 marriage rings here because we've got 2 women, and there's a competition going to go on in chapter 30 as to who can get, Jacob's blessing by giving him the most kids. So chapter 30 and verse 1, when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. She said to Jacob, give me children or I shall die. And so we got this real competition going on, this big envious whatever. Remember, Jacob loves Rachel. He wanted Rachel. That was the whole reason for working, so he could get Rachel. But in the process, Laban comes up with this, and it may very well have been a cultural thing. I don't know, but it was rather deceptive of him not to educate his son-in-law earlier on. But he said, I got to give you my oldest daughter first. And so Leah, who evidently was not as pretty as Rachel, Leah gets married off first, then comes Rachel. But that sets forth this competition. And it's rather interesting, I think, that we get the 12 tribes of Israel out of this rather carnal competition that takes place between two women. And anyhow, we're only going to get 11 in this chapter. Benjamin is yet to come. But Joseph is the last to be born, and that's the reason we're going to stop there with the whatever, is because Joseph is very, very significant to not just the timeline, but he's very significant to Jacob and Rachel, their firstborn. And we're going to see that as that takes place, Joseph, that is being born, that Jacob is going to say to his father-in-law, it's time for me to go home. And so he's going to pack up and he wants to head out. And that's largely the idea here in this particular chapter. All right, here's the text, a lot of it. We're going to have to move. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, she envied her sister. She said to Jacob, give me children or I shall die. That's our memory verse, so we've already covered that. But notice how Jacob's going to respond. Jacob's anger was kindled against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? In other words, not to be too graphic, but I think Jacob's saying, I'm doing all I can. It takes two to tango, as they say, and I'm doing all I can, and I'm sorry that this isn't resulting in you getting pregnant, but I'm doing all I can. I can't play God. And so he's very angry with his favorite wife at this particular point, because she is trying to manipulate the situation into getting children. And it gets worse. It's really sad what happened in this particular chapter. And again, I just find it so interesting that God can take such a carnal chapter, a carnal competition, and turn it into what has become the blessing of the world. That is the 12 tribes of Israel. Jews come on the scene. Through them, we're going to get the Messiah, etc. God's amazing. You just can't deny it. God's amazing. All right, verse 3. Then she said, here is my servant Bilhah. Go into her so that she may give birth on my behalf, and that even I may have children through her. Now, we'll just give a little bit of credit in the sense that Rachel evidently wasn't as familiar with the story of Sarah as she should have. At least it doesn't seem like it, or she'd have made a better application. Also, I think we could probably say that this might have been somewhat of a customary, kind of a perverted custom, I think, but maybe somewhat of a customary thing back in the day. It was very, very important for a man to have an heir. It was very, very important to a woman that she be familial, meaning this goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 3, that she is an individual who understands that she brings about the children as well as manages the household. I think that particular theme is supposed to be carried out throughout history, and we actually find, I think, that not only does family do better when a woman is dominated by the familial role, but we also find that culture definitely does better. Look at our culture today. Notice the decline in morality, etc., and I think it has a direct connection to what's happening in our homes. But back to our point, I don't know that this is necessarily blessed of God, but Rachel has this thought in mind. You see a lot of reoccurring themes, don't you, with regards to this? The idea of going to Laban's house to get the wives and various themes that are happening throughout. Well, here's another one. Just like Sarah told Abraham, hey, take my servant and you go in and lie with her. Basically, she becomes your wife, and whoever she produces, then that individual will be my child. Well, it never works out really very well, as you can imagine, because you didn't produce that child, okay? And it's not like today's adoption situation where oftentimes the biological parents have been moved aside or are separated somewhat. In this situation, we've got the children are running around the same camp that is being, if you will, reigned over by the paternal figure. In this case, it would be Jacob. And so there isn't that separation. It doesn't work out. We saw what happened with regards to Abraham and Sarah and Ishmael, the half child of Sarah. That's not even right. I mean, it wasn't half. It was Abraham's child through the servant, right? And so Hagar, and so it's just a messed up scenario. But we're going to see not only is Rachel going to take this approach, Leah later is going to get into the competition because she stops having kids, and she's going to take the same reproach. And we're going to reproach. I think it is somewhat that approach. And you see what happens here. And so Bilhah, who is the servant, the head servant, if you will, of Rachel, she is going to then become the wife of Jacob. Go into her, that she may have birth, I may have, and I may have the children that comes through her. So she gave him her servant Bilhah as a wife, and Jacob went into her. And Bilhah conceived, and she bore Jacob a son. Then Rachel said, God has judged me and has heard my voice and given me a son. Therefore she called his name Dan. Okay? And so we're going to begin in chapter 30. We're going to begin the continuation. I guess that's right. The continuation of the children. And so by the time we get done with chapter 30, we're going to have 11 of them. Rachel's servant Bilhah conceived again. She bore Jacob a second son. Then Rachel said, with mighty wrestlings I have wrestled with my sister and have prevailed. See the competition here? We're having a baby challenge. Who can have the most babies? And in this particular situation, Rachel's not having them, but she is taking credit for her servant's children. Okay, so she called his name Naphtali. Come on. Oh, the thing freezes up so much lately. I've noticed it just does not like me. Why doesn't it like me? I don't know. Is that verse 8? It is. All right, here we go. When Leah, so now she's the other wife. Remember? She's the first wife who Jacob didn't want, but he got. Okay? When Leah saw that she had ceased bearing children, she took her servant Zilpah, and she said, well, if my sister can do it, I can too. And she says to Zilpah, or says to Jacob, have Zilpah as your wife. Then Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a son. So at this particular point, as far as wives are concerned, and I don't know exactly how you would rank them, because I don't think that Bilhah and Zilpah are on the same level as Leah and Rachel, especially given the fact that both Leah and Rachel believe that they can claim their children. But it does call them wives. And so at some level, at this point, Jacob's got 4 of them. All right. And Leah said, good fortune has come to me. So she called his name Gad. Leah's servant Zilpah bore Jacob a second son, and Leah said, happy am I, for women have called me happy. So she called his name Asher. And so we got the children coming on. They're just birthing babies left and right. In the days of wheat harvest, Reuben went out and he found mandrakes in the field and brought them to his mother Leah. The scholars that I have read and the study that I have done over the years would suggest that the mandrakes are somewhat like an aphrodisiac. Okay, and they believe that these things that they would help the production of children. Okay, anyhow, so Reuben's out there and he's wandering around doing whatever Reuben was doing, and he finds mandrakes, and so he brings them to his mom. Then Rachel said to Leah, please give me some of your son's mandrakes. But she said to her, is it a small matter that you have taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also? So, we're into that, they're arguing back and forth because you're always the favorite, that kind of thing. He didn't want to marry me, or want, claim my husband, all that kind of stuff. And so they're arguing back and forth. Rachel said, then he may lie with you tonight in exchange for your son's mandrakes. See how, this is getting pretty bad. Not only are we, having a race to see who can have as many kids as possible, we're giving away our servants so that our husband can have more people to lay with. And now what we're actually doing an exchange. In fact, it's going to reference later. Leah's actually going to say, I basically bought you off for tonight, Jacob. You got to come sleep with me. And so Rachel is going to say, listen, if you will give me some mandrakes, then I will encourage, because remember, Rachel's the favorite wife, and so she probably does have a lot of influence as to where Jacob sleeps at night. And Rachel said, then I'll have my husband's going to come and lie with you. Well, when Jacob comes home from the field that evening, Leah went out to meet him and said, watch it, you must come in to me, for I have hired you with my son's mandrakes. What a marriage. How romantic is that? You got to come sleep with me tonight because I bought off your sister. Anyhow, so I've hired you, and I got the mandrakes. I gave her the mandrakes, and so you got to come sleep with me tonight. So he lay with her that night. We don't have an argument. It doesn't seem like Jacob, inserts himself into this particular battle much at all, which, I think is a bad news point on his behalf. Kind of like going all the way back to Adam. Remember? Everybody wants to blame Eve because she was the one who ate the fruit, and she needs to be blamed. Don't get me wrong. But you know what? Adam evidently wasn't deceived as, big word, as his wife. Because he came along, and it's his wife who is going to evidently give him the fruit. Now, was he standing nearby here, the whole deception thing with regards to Satan? No, maybe so. But the point is that his wife is the one who's deceived first. We know that plays out later in scriptures. And so Eve is deceived first. Adam should have had enough backbone as a man to say, no, I'm not going to go down that route, but he didn't. And so we got the same thing going on here. It seems like with Jacob. Surely Jacob's not blind to what's going on between these two sisters. You know what I'm saying? Anyhow, I mean, especially at this point, what would you say? Leah comes out and says, hey, you got to sleep with me tonight because I bought you off. I mean, think about that. I mean, this is really warped. All right. And God listened to Leah. So he lay with her that night. God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. It really seems like throughout that God is kind of sympathetic to Leah. Have you noticed that? We saw that earlier last chapter. We saw that God allowed Leah to be the one who actually bears a child first because she was not loved. I think the term actually there was hated, probably meaning loved less than her sister Rachel. And so God is merciful. Same situation goes on here. In spite of what's taking place, I don't think God's pleased with all that's going on, but he recognizes that Leah, she's kind of coming in second all the time. And so anyhow, God listened, and we're going to get the fifth son. Leah said, God has given me wages because I gave my servant to my husband. So she called his name Issachar. Forgive me. I think it's allergies. And Leah conceived again, and she bore Jacob a sixth son. Then Leah said, God has endowed me with a good endowment. Now my son will honor me. My husband will honor me because I have borne him 6 sons. And so now we got 6 sons coming to Leah so far. That's half of the tribes of Israel, right? And of course we're counting in here the children that come via the servant, the handmaid, as well. Okay, so she called his name Zebulun. Afterwards, she bore a daughter and called her name Dinah. Now we don't get a lot of information on Dinah at this particular point. We are going to find out some things about Dinah later on. That's interesting, and I'll leave the mystery at this particular point. But she does come up later in the story. Right now, what we're doing, though, is we're trying to trace the competition that is producing the 12 sons, the 12 tribes of Israel. We're not going to get all 12 in 29 and 30, but we're going to get close. Verse 22. Then God remembered Rachel. Okay, so now we got the 6 sons and a daughter up here. Now God's going to remember Rachel. Now remember, up to this point, Rachel's not had any kids personally. Remember, so she herself has been barren, which is another one of those interesting themes, is it not? Remember, Sarah was barren. Okay, so she's barren, but God's going to remember her, and God listened to her and opened her womb, and she conceived and bore a son, and God said, God has taken away my reproach, and she called his name, boom. Major name on the timeline of history, Joseph. So keep this in mind, because what you're going to see with this is the beginnings of the stories that you are so familiar with. You learned in Sunday school all that, where Joseph is going to be hated by his brother, the coat of many colors, thrown into a well, taken to Egypt, left there as if he was dead and gone. His father will mourn over him. Eventually, remember that he's going to actually grow into a power. He becomes second in command over all of Egypt because God works through him. And all of those stories, those phenomenal stories, are wrapping themselves around Joseph. Here's where it gets started. Okay, so place him on the timeline of your mind as you're putting all this stuff together. Here's where Joseph, enters the timeline, and she calls him Joseph, saying, "May the Lord add to me another son." As soon as Rachel had born Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, that's interesting. As soon as Rachel bears Joseph, there seems to be some kind of a conclusionary moment in the mind of Jacob. I think some of it had to do with the fact that he wanted his wife, his favorite wife, to be validated by God, etc. Well, she has Joseph, and that kind of kicks him in the bottom. Kind of reminds him of home, I guess, whatever. So when she conceives and then bears Joseph, he's going to say, time to head out. So he bears Joseph, and Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my home and country. Now, there's going to be an interlude here. We don't leave immediately, okay? Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go, for you know the service that I have given to you. So he evidently has completed his years. At this particular point, it's at least 14, we know, that has taken place. So, but Laban said to him, no. I have found favor in your sight, if I have found favor in your sight. I learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. So Laban, evidently having the pagan side to his existence, he evidently recognizes God to some degree, but he evidently recognizes other gods as well, which would not have been uncommon given where he's living, etc. But Laban is going to say, hold it, I recognize that I'm blessed by having you in the camp. And so he says, hold on, name your wages and I'll give it. Jacob said, you yourself know how I have served you and how your livestock has fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it has increased abundantly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I turn. So Jacob says, you're right. Because I'm in the camp, you've been blessed. You need to pay attention to that, old Laban. But now, when shall I provide for my own household also? He said, what shall I give you? So Laban wants to know, okay, I get it. You want to start your own investments, if you will. So what do you need? What do you want? Jacob's going to say, you shall give me anything. If you will do this for me, I will again, you should not give me anything, excuse me. If you do this for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. So he says, right now, just don't worry about it. Well, I'm going to serve you for a little bit longer. I'm going to keep it. Let me pass through, however, your flock today, removing it from it every speckled and spotted sheep and every black lamb, and the spotted and speckled among the goats, and they shall be my wages. Evidently, they were less valuable, or at least they seemed, because of their appearance, maybe they seemed to be less valuable. So my honesty will answer for me later when you come to look into my wages with you. Everyone that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and the black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted stolen. And so he said, give me the ones that have this kind of odd look to them, and I'll take them. Laban said, good, let it be as you said. But, that's a big word. Verse 35, Laban's going to pull another trick on him. That day Laban went out and he removed the male goats that were spotted, striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in charge of his sons. And he set a distance of 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob pastured the rest of Laban's flock. And so he's trying to offset this whole scheme of Jacob, and so he evidently grabs out those that Jacob would have claimed, and he takes them and sends them 3 days journey off. So it's not likely that Jacob can grab them easily. Then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond plane trees and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the sticks. He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is the watering places where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred when they came, came to drink. The flocks bred in front of the sticks, and so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. We don't have a lot of information as to how that worked, except later on, Jacob is actually going to say in chapter 31, he's going to say, the reason it worked is because God blessed me. All right. And Jacob separated the lambs and set the faces of the flocks towards the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban. He put his own droves apart and did not put them with Laban's flock. Whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in the troughs before their eyes of the flock that they may breed among the sticks. There's a wise move. So he's going to have the stronger of the animals that are breeding. But for the feebler of the flock, he would not lay them there because he didn't want the feebler. So the feebler would be Laban's, and the stronger would be Jacob's. Thus the man increased greatly in large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Come on. Oh, that is it. So that's good because I have several prayer requests I need to get into. So when you see this passage unfold, from beginning to end, and I'm not just talking about him laying the sticks in front of the flock. I'm talking all the way back here to the two sisters as they're going at it. Who can produce the most children, in the shortest amount of time. That kind of thing. This is an odd chapter. You got to admit that. But from beginning to end, what we see with regards to Jacob, I don't know why, but God does what God wants to do. But he sees something in Jacob, and he blesses Jacob. And at this particular point, we have 11 sons that have been born to Jacob and a daughter. And so there's a big blessing there. And then in spite of Laban's attempt to deceive Jacob, we even see that Jacob is going to be able to circumvent that. So by the time he leaves camp, Jacob's going to be a very wealthy man. Okay, so God continues to bless him. All right, that's chapter 20. No, that's chapter 30. And here are the questions we just tried to answer. You got them? All right, don't forget the doodle. I think this is a really good clue. You see the 3 and the 0? Okay, a lot of kids coming out on chapter 30, but do the doodle. Send me a picture. Maybe you got a better idea on what we should have as far as the clue is concerned. Tonight at 7 o'clock, we will, as always, be having our evening Zoom service. It's really become a big deal. We got folks all across the country, and even my friend in India on occasion joins in, and it's really a really cool thing. And so if you're looking to have that kind of a fellowship across the state lines and all of that, we do a lot of things. We sing. We try to keep it in an hour. We sing. We have prayer requests. That's a big deal. And we have Bible study. And some of it is just catching up with each other, what's going on in your life over the last week, etc. And so it really a fun time. So if you want to be a part of this, I need an email address. I have Cindy added to the database, and you'll get a invitation. That's what it is, an invitation about 6:45 tonight, and asking, hey, you want to be a part? And all you got to do is accept the invitation. Coming your way, next Sunday, I will be in Mackville, Kentucky, and I'm going to teach the Bible class, and my youngest son, is going to preach a sermon. Looking forward to that. The end of the month, I'll be in Abbeville, and then in November, I will be at Bone Gap in Illinois. I wanted to mention that my son had a crazy, awesome summer, but after getting done being the intern at the Missionaries for America program, he traveled down to Memphis, the Germantown Church of Christ, and he was part of the SOS camp that they have that includes drama, art, music, etc. But anyhow, here's one of the things that he did with the young people. The theme was prophecies, and he dealt with Genesis 3:15, and just did a phenomenal job. Last thing that I need to bring to your attention is something I'm hoping to do this week. I've had a good friend somewhere in Africa, I forgot where he's from, who has been asking me questions with regards to divorce and remarriage, etc. And then I have a very dear friend, very good Bible student, actually he's my cousin in Pennsylvania, who brought up some thoughts with regards to this. And so I've been studying on the subject matter of divorce. What does the Bible actually say about remarriage when it comes to divorce? Is adultery the only reason we are allowed to seek divorce? And an interesting passage that I want to challenge that conclusion with. Not really going to, at least at this particular point in these messages, I'm not going to really draw a lot of conclusions, as much as I'm just hoping to lay before you what the Bible says and suggest to you that at the end of the day, this is really a moment between you and God somewhat. Now, I do think that there are some things that God just says can happen. And I believe that the idea of an elder being divorced is one of them. I don't believe a shepherd of the flock. Because that's taking you to an entirely different level of leadership within the church. I don't believe an elder in the church should be divorced. We'll talk about that this week. But I'm planning to send out, and this will be part of my Facebook feed. If you're interested in having that, reach out to me, and I'll accept you as a friend or whatever. As we try to, there'll be several of these lessons dealing with a very, very hot topic, interesting issue. A lot of folks in our day and age, they just want to go the warm, fuzzy route of just validate everybody and don't worry about it. Let's move on. We're not going to do that. Let's look and see what the Bible actually says about divorce, remarriage, etc. How about abandonment? Is that grounds for divorce? And if it's grounds for divorce, then is it also grounds for remarriage? We're going to try to cover that. So if you're interested, let me know, and we'll try to include you in our Facebook time. All right, we got any? I'm looking at my feed here to see if anybody has listed anything with regards to prayer requests, and I don't see anything. Several folks have tuned in and let me know that, but I love you. Thank you for doing that. But anybody in the last couple seconds here, if you got a prayer request, let me know. Put it up there regardless, even during the sermon time, we'll have that. I got to get a drink. Even though it's 9:30 and it's time to go, got to keep that water flowing. Lord's Day Live, thank you so much for joining me this morning. We are dealing with Revelation chapters 19 through 22, this quarter of the School of Biblical Studies. And I'm calling them the climactic chapters. And as we are beginning to go through these, I think it's pretty clear to you why we would call them that. Everything, it seems, in the book of Revelation has been moving towards these points. In 19 and 20, we're actually going to see the beast and the false prophet are going to be thrown into the lake of fire. And then Satan is going to be bound for 1,000 years, released for a short period of time. Then he's going to go to the lake of fire. And so we see the endings. In fact, let me just put that screen up there. And so we see how things are playing out with regards to the endings. In chapter 18, Babylon falls. 19, what I just described for you. Chapter 20, Satan is going to actually be thrown into the lake of fire as well. We're going to deal with that in our time together today. As we move into 21, we begin to see marvelous stuff with regards to the bride and the bridegroom and all those kind of things. Then in chapter 22, we'll deal with the new heavens and the new earth and some phenomenal stuff there as well. All right, let's go to the text. Here is what we saw last time. I saw thrones seated on them where those who are going to have the authority to judge, etc. But what I wanted you to really see is that verse 5, the rest of the dead did not come until 1,000 years were ended. So we're into that 1,000-year reign. Everybody debates as to when that will happen. But whatever you do with that, that's where we're at in the depiction that has been given to us in the book of Revelation. This is the first resurrection. Blessed is the one who shares in the first resurrection. Over such the second death has no power. We will define the second death. Well, the Holy Spirit will define the second death in our passage this morning. And but they'll be priests of God, etc. All right. As you move then into new material, verse 7, we've talked about the 1,000-year reign. Now what happens after it? It's done. Well, when the 1,000 years ends, Satan is going to be released from his prison. 1,000 years. Again, two perspectives on the 1,000 years. One that it's a literal, and the other is that it's figurative. Generally, those who are literal in their 1,000 years are the individuals we would call premillennial. Those who are figurative are generally the group that I call present millennial. They would call amillennial, but I call them present. They believe that we are presently living in the church age, and the church age is the 1,000-year reign. But you say to yourself, well, the church has been around for more than 1,000 years. Yes, they acknowledge that. But they would say that it's not a literal number. They would say it's a figurative number that represents a very, very long time. I'm not so sure what they're right. And yet I'm not a present millennialist any longer. I believe that there is a coming age of a millennium period that could be either a literal 1,000 years or a figurative 1,000 years, but I believe it is yet to come, okay? And so I'm really careful as I study through the book of Revelation, you know this, but I try very hard not to preach assumed certainties. And I'm not saying that I haven't, and if I have, forgive me, but I'm just saying that we got to really be careful when we're dealing with the mystery language like's going on in the book of Revelation. And I have faulted many in the premillennial world for going too far, okay? And I have faulted many in the present millennial world for not going far enough, okay? And so I think I'm fair. But as we deal with this idea of 1,000 years, all I'm saying to you is that I don't know that it's literal or not. Just like I don't know that the 7 years of tribulation are literal. Daniel does not say 7 years. It says 7. And knowing that, then you have to ask yourself, is it really good of me to allow some of the assumptions to be put forth without at least giving a little bit of qualification as to why I think it could be this way? It's kind of like the Left Behind series, which I have a lot of problems with, because there are so many things that they preach as if this is the way it's going to happen, and you don't know that it's going to happen that way. It could. It might even be likely. But you got to be careful to give those qualifiers. And that's why in this particular lesson and others, I have been very, very careful about preaching assumed certainties. Here's one of them. 1,000 years? I don't know. There have been other numbers. You know it's true. There's been other numbers within the book of Revelation that have been figurative. Why couldn't 1,000 be figurative? Not everything in the book of Revelation is literal. Not everything in the book of Revelation is figurative. You've got to admit that. Moving on. It says that after that happens, this is the big moment. Satan is going to be released from his prison. Now, I say it's a big moment because it's going to lead up to the biggest moment as far as Satan is concerned, when he's going to be thrown into the lake of fire. And that's going to be a good thing. He'll be out of here and we'll be done with it. But that hasn't happened yet. At this particular point in the timeline, Satan is going to be released, and the ESV translates it as his prison. I just wanted to do something this week that I did last time in our last class, that to show you just how far we are going with regards to this binding of Satan. Now, the reason this is important is because there are those in the present millennial world will claim that Satan is presently bound in the church age. And I'm saying, really? Notice how far he's supposed to be bound. He's not just supposed to be limited. He's bound and put away so that he cannot deceive. It's not just a limitation here. This is a bound and put away. Notice in Revelation 20, which we just saw last lesson, that Satan is going to be, in the 1,000 years that he was sealed up or put down, he's going to be thrown into a pit, and the pit is going to be shut, and it's going to be sealed. Now we find out in verse 7 that it's called a prison. Those who would claim that Satan during the church age he is limited, and thus this passage is referring to his limitations, I'm not sure how they can make that square up with the extreme expressions as to how he's limited. Satan isn't just put on a long chain where he could just kind of, occasionally wander out there. No. In this 1,000-year period, he is shut up, sealed over, and placed in a prison. In other words, he's pushed aside, and it's specifically so he cannot deceive the nations. This is one of the more powerful passages for me as to why I changed my viewpoint from a present millennial to a premillennial kind of a setting. Because I believe that this passage powerfully indicates that during the 1,000-year reign, Satan is not just limited, he's put aside, completely put aside. And that's just not happening to the church age as far as I can see. It's just not. In fact, Peter says this about the church age. He says, we as Christians need to be sober-minded, careful, watchful, because your adversary, the devil, he is prowling around seeking those who he can devour, and he's doing this throughout the entire world. He's not on a short chain. He's not limited. He is actually pursuing. And so I really struggle with the idea that during the church age, this stuff takes place with regards to Satan. I don't see it. I don't see Satan being put aside that way at all. In fact, I think that he is vibrant in his deception and going after the world, present tense. Thus, I believe that there is yet a coming millennium. Even though I didn't used to believe that, I believe it now. All right. Deceive the nations that are at the forefront. So he's going to come out and he's going to deceive the nations. Remember, that's why he was limited. No. That's why he was put in prison. That's why he has no power over the nations. That's not happening in the church age as far as I can tell. But now he's going to be released for this short amount of time, and he is going to deceive the nations. And in that deceptive setting, he is going to deceive them so much that they're from the four corners of the earth. I mean, everybody, it seems. The masses are going to be drawn to his deception. Gog and Magog, gather them for battle. Their numbers like the sand of the sea. So you can see that it's just, the vast majority of folks are going to be deceived by Satan. Even though we've had this 1,000 years of rule and reign of Jesus, now in this short little time, we're going to see that all you got to do is let the devil stick his nose under the tent, and boom, chaos comes about again. And that's what's happening. Gog and Magog, they are mentioned in Ezekiel 39, 1 and 6. You son of man, prophesy against Gog and say, thus the Lord, behold, I am against you. There's Gog. And then he says, later on, I'll send fire on Magog. We're going to see that's going to play out here in just a moment as the idea of the fire coming down. But these were pagan oppressors of Israel of old. And so we've got that microcosm, macrocosm thing happening that I've used earlier on in the book of Revelation. The microcosm, small. The microcosm is the Gog and Magog of the Old Testament. These represented individuals who pressured the children of Israel, God's people in the Old Testament. The macrocosm is what takes place at the end of time when they are called, that's those who are gathered together by Satan. They are called Gog and Magog. This is the macro, the big conclusion, as they are going to come up against God's people in the conclusionary part. So this microcosm, macrocosm fulfillment of prophecy, I think is a very, very important hermeneutical approach to interpreting Revelation, eschatology, end times things, because you can see so often that God will take in times past something small and to say, now in the future, you're going to see a parallel to this. And then in the future, this big thing takes place. You got Israel, small. It's a microcosm of what? The church, which is to come. Okay? And so I'm not into replacement theology. That's not what I'm saying. But what I'm saying is that the microcosm expands. This is Romans chapter 11. It expands into something much bigger, the church. And so as Jesus comes, then we have the middle partition is broken down, and we've got both the Jew and the Gentile are invited in, and then you have the entirety of the church that comes about. I believe, by the way, that's a major theme within the book of Revelation, and I do believe the church shows up in the middle of the book of Revelation. We've done that before as well. All right, moving on. So they marched, that is that group that Satan has deceived, they marched up over the broad plain of the earth, and they surrounded the camp of the saints, another use of the term saints, which is primarily used in the New Testament for Christians. So here you've got the church being surrounded, it seems to me. You got the church being surrounded and the beloved city. Throughout biblical history, God has often sheltered his people through tribulation. This protection has been a powerful evidence or an evidentiary tool to convict the world. It should not be an unexpected event for the church as well. Again, I get myself in a lot of trouble, but I just try to look at it from the biblical perspective. I'm trying not to allow past human assumptions to guide my interpretation of this marvelous book. God has throughout time used his people and guided his people through very difficult times so that it would be evidence to the world that I'm in control, I protect my people, and if you want that protection, you need to join with my people. I'm not so sure, but what that same evidentiary tool, which is the consistent nature of God throughout the timeline, might very well be used during the time of tribulation. Meaning, I think it's likely that the church will experience at least part of the tribulation period. I do not buy into the certainty that the rapture, biblically speaking, really, the called out of the church has to happen before any tribulation takes place. I just don't buy that. I believe that it's possible, given the consistent nature of God, that the church will have to endure some of the tribulation. But they say, but Sonny, how could he ever allow his bride? He has allowed his people from the beginning. And the premillennialists who are so big on Israel and Israel's place and all of those kind of things, he allowed his people, Israel, go back to Egypt. His people, Israel, went through all of the plagues that were put upon Egypt, including the death of the firstborn, even though God put his hand of protection over top of them. I know and I understand, and I don't believe that we will be the target of God's wrath, but we may very well have to travel through God's wrath under his protection, his umbrella of protection, in order to be evidence to the world of who God is. It's the consistent nature of God. I'm not sure why he would stop at the end of time. Now, I'm not saying that it has to be such, because I'm not going to be guilty of preaching the assumed certainties, but I am saying that it's wrong of you and I to not at least entertain that possibility. And I've come up against a lot of church leaders lately who just simply are stuck in the mud and will not grow. And that's wrong. We have got to continue to grow in our faith. Otherwise, we have lost our faith. So, whoever these people are, whatever conclusion you come to, they are surrounded. And what's God going to do? He's going to do what God has done throughout history with regards to his people. But fire came down from heaven and consumed them. And think about the evidentiary offering that is being given here to not just the people of the planet, but every other created being that is out there. And we know that they are. Read the book of Daniel. Think about what's taking place here as God protects his people in the midst of tribulation. That's pretty big. Let's go back. What did I say up there? I forgot. I had a passage that was, the Ezekiel passage again. Back in the Old Testament, God predicts this whole Gog and Magog. And where does it say that? I will send fire on them. Okay, well, that's what he does. Here's the microcosm. Here's the macrocosm. And the devil who had deceived them was finally thrown into the lake of fire and sulfur. This is the same place where the beast and the false prophet were thrown earlier on, chapter 19. They were captured and they were thrown there, thrown alive into the lake of fire. So the lake of fire, unlike the bottomless pit, it's the lake of fire that evidently is the eternal condition into which Satan is being cast now, along with the ones who already have been inhabiting that place, and that is the beast and the false prophet. Come on, why did you go too fast? Last thing I would mention here with verse 10 is notice how what the length of the period of time is for Satan, the beast, and the false prophet, and everybody who goes with them into that torment, day and night, forever and ever. Now, you do whatever you want with that, but I got a lot of friends who believe that hell is going to be just a momentary thing where you're just burn up and you're done. It's over. But that does not seem to be in any way the description that's being given here in the book of Revelation. In fact, he seems to be rather redundant. He seems to go out of his way to make sure you see it's day and night, forever and ever. And there's no reason to even believe there's a day and night in hell because it's total blackness according to the scriptures that we have. Okay, so what does he mean when he says day and night? These are words of symbolism to suggest it's ongoing, it's eternal, it doesn't stop. Okay, day and night, forever and ever. Okay. Verse 11. Then I saw a great white throne, and this is an amazing passage. I saw a great white throne, and him who was seated on it. From his presence, earth and sky flowed away, and no place was found for them. I'll step over here so you can see this. So we're going to see the great white throne judgment. Daniel 7, as you go way back, there is a really awesome description of God and his throne. As I looked, Daniel said, thrones were placed, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. Notice it's thrones. You'll notice in the book of Revelation, we've got the thrones that are also there with regards to 24 elders, etc. Okay, but anyhow, so the thrones are placed, and the Ancient of Days, that's God himself, is going to take his seat. His clothing, the clothing of God was white as snow. His hair like pure wool. So he looks like an old man, but don't get the idea that he's frail. That's not at all the power or the picture here. This is a powerful old man, or a powerful ancient man, individual who has survived all time. Okay, because he was there when time was created. His throne was fiery flames. Its wheels were burning fire. Not sure why the throne has wheels, but it does. A stream of fire issued and came out from before him. 1,000 thousands served him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court sat in judgment, and the books were open. That's going to come up here in just a moment. And the books were open. Powerful description of who God is. I preached an entire sermon on the Ancient of Days, actually an entire series from this very text, the Ancient of Days and who he is, etc. Well, as we get to Revelation chapter 20 and verse 11, we're beginning to see who the Ancient of Days is. The great white throne has come into view now. And watch what takes place when the great white throne comes about. Earth and sky are going to fly, they're going to flee. They fled away, and no place was found for them. As you move forward into chapter 21, we're going to find this. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. Why? For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more. And so the earth and sky, they're gone. Because we're going to get a new heaven and a new earth. And so this is what takes place when the great white throne judgment occurs on the timeline. Let's see, I think I need to come back. Then another book, okay, yeah. And I saw the dead, great and small, standing before the throne, and the books are open. Remember, we saw that in Daniel. Then another book was opened, which is the book of life, and the dead were judged by what was written in the books according to what they had done. And so the books contain the actions of individuals and what they had been doing, and etc. And then we've got the book of life as well, which is the one you really need to get your name in. Verse 13. And the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them, and they were judged, each one of them according to what they had done. To the Calvinists, may I remind you that judgment is going to come according to what you have done, not necessarily according to what God has done. Certainly God has a part in this. He's the one who created you. But if you read Acts 17, 12, 26 and 27, I think it's Acts 17, 26 and 27, yeah. If you read that passage, it says that God does something, and you should do something in response. What God did is he put you on the timeline exactly where he wanted you to be. Now, your job is to seek and to reach out to him. And this is what you'll be judged by. Did you seek him? Did you reach out to him? Jesus has provided you with grace. Did you accept it? I want you to see this passage, 2 Corinthians 5. Yes, we are of good courage, and we would rather be away from the body and at home with the Lord. So we'd like to just go and be with the Lord. But that's not the case at the moment. So whether we are at home or away, we make it our aim to please him. Verse 10 is very important. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may receive what is due and what has been done in the body, whether good or evil. What has been done in the body, what has been done, okay? Many believe that the great white throne judgment will not include the church, but it will just include those who are not, who are the lost. Could be, I don't know. I'm not going to go there with the assumed certainties again, but again, that conclusion is largely based on the conclusion that the church has to be out of here prior to this. That all the church has been gone because we got a pre-tribulation rapture that's going on. So you're building a conclusion upon a conclusion, and I suggest to you that the first conclusion has not been established, and so you need to be really careful about that. So whatever happens here, Paul said way back in 2 Corinthians, he said all of us are appointed a time when we will be standing before the judgment seat of God, judgment seat of Christ. Now, is that the same thing as the great white throne judgment? You and I have to debate that out, but it's interesting the similarities. We're going to be judged by what they've done, being judged by what they've done, what we've done. And then you're going to say, then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death. I told you earlier on in the previous paragraph that we're going to define the second death. Well, here you got it. The second death is the idea of being thrown away into the lake of fire, which is where we now have Satan and the beast and the false prophet. All right. So those who go there their names are not written in the book of life. They have received the mark of the beast. They have given themselves over to the devil. They were complacent, expecting that they had everything hunky-dory, like the Matthew 7 folks, who said, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? You didn't cast out demons. And said they thought they were right, but they didn't do the will of the Father. They were paying too much attention to the will of man and human doctrine and all of those kind of things. They're going to go away into the lake of fire. That is the second death. And notice what he's going to be saying here, though. This is so powerful with regards to death and Hades. The death and Hades, the conditions of death and Hades, they are actually thrown into that eternal condition as well, where they will go away and will no longer have to deal with them. 1 Corinthians 15, then comes the end. He says, when we deliver the kingdom of God, when he delivers the kingdom of God to the Father after destroying every rule and every authority and power. For he must reign until he has put all enemies under his feet. The last enemy to be destroyed, guess what? Is death. Where is it? Death. Last enemy. So that's going to be the last thing. That is the conclusion, it seems, to the great white throne judgment idea. That they are going to go into there with, this is very big, with, I think that's the last, it is. Come back in. With anyone's name was not found written in the book of life, he was thrown into the lake of fire also. And so, who do you have in the lake of fire? Most of God's creation. Sadly to say, but it's the truth. Most of God's creation will go there. We've got the beast. We've got the false prophet. We've got Satan himself. And now everybody who has not been written in the book of life, they are there along with the conditions called death and Hades. And this, as you can see, is the big climax to the endings. Good stuff. Put it aside. And those of us who are faithful, we then will be able to go on and live with the Lord throughout eternity. It's going to be great. And we'll describe that eternity in the coming chapters. So don't you dare go away. Please remember, my family, if you will, in your giving, we try very hard to address things that nobody else seems to want to be talking about. And because of that, we lose a lot of support on occasion. But we are thankful for all of you who keep us alive. Please remember us. Here's ways that you can contribute toward our ministry. And we would love it if you did so. Lord's Supper, time for fellowship. I hope that as you embrace the Lord's Day, that you'll recognize it's not really the Lord's Day unless you spend time with the Lord. Let him have control over this day. And maybe the most important thing you can do is make sure that you acknowledge what he did in that ultimate sacrifice for you. Make sure that you take communion, and as you do it with a broken heart that is filled with God and thus healed, so that you can have great joy, a joy that only comes from God because of the Lord's Supper. Thank you for joining me. Be there, Matthew 16:26.